I found this story where it shouldn't have been, and once you hear it, it doesn't let go.
The waitress smiled when she poured my coffee and said, "You're later than usual tonight, Daniel." And that was the exact moment I knew I should have walked back out into the storm, because I had never seen that truck stop in my life. I had never driven Black Ridge Road before, and nobody working a graveyard shift in the middle of. Nowhere should have known my name. I'm Mr. D. And you are listening to Mr. D Stories. Most of you listening to my stories are not subscribed yet, so please like and subscribe to hear more from Bloody Chapter. My name is Daniel Voss, and at the time this happened I had been driving long haul for just under 3 years, long enough to know lonely highways mess with your head. But not long enough to stop believing every strange thing had a sensible explanation if you kept your nerve and thought it through. That night I was hauling auto parts through the mountains after missing a way station window and losing nearly 2 hours on my route, and dispatch had sent me through a stretch of road called Black Ridge to make up time before dawn. My first mistake was trusting the GPS more than my own instincts, because the screen started acting wrong the second I turned onto that road. It flickered once, recalculated twice, then stopped showing road names entirely. The blue line stayed there, but the map beneath it turned a flat gray, like I had driven off the edge of the known world. Rain came down harder the higher I climbed, and fog rolled low over the asphalt in long strips that looked almost alive in the headlights. The radio gave me nothing but static. My phone had no bars. The only sound inside the cab was the wipers, the engine, and my own breathing getting tighter every time I rounded a blind curve and saw nothing ahead but more mountain and dark. Then the fuel light came on, not empty, but low enough to start turning every mile into an argument in my head. I muttered that there had to be a station soon, because no road this long stayed this empty without one, and about 5 minutes later I saw it through the rain. A warm yellow glow on the right side of the road, a faded neon sign buzzing "Last Stop Diner, too old." Pumps under a metal canopy, and half a dozen parked semis standing in the lot like cattle sheltering from weather. Relief hit me so hard it almost made me laugh. I pulled in, killed the engine, and sat there for a second listening to the rain drum on the roof, letting my shoulders unlock. The place looked old but alive, light in the windows, steam on the glass, a red open sign flickering in one corner. Inside, I could see movement, truckers hunched over plates, someone behind the counter filling a mug. It felt wrong in the way roadside places sometimes do, too bright against too much dark, but it also looked like exactly what I needed. Fuel, coffee, a bathroom, 10 quiet minutes before finishing the run. I pulled my jacket up, jogged through the rain, and stepped inside to the smell of bacon grease, old coffee, wet coats, and something underneath it that I couldn't place at first. Something stale and sweet, like flowers left too long in standing water. The conversation stopped the second I entered, not gradually, not naturally, just stopped. 6 men in booths and counter stools turned to look at me all at once. And for a moment the only sound in the diner was rain tapping the windows. Then the waitress behind the counter smiled like we'd known each other for years, reached for a mug, and said, "You're later than usual tonight, Daniel." I actually laughed because fear sometimes hides inside politeness. I told her she must have me confused with somebody else. She shook her head slowly, set the mug down in front of an empty stool, and said, "No, honey, we've been waiting on you." It should have been enough then, but tired people do stupid things if comfort is close enough to smell. I sat down anyway. The coffee was already poured before I asked for it. The cup was warm in my hands, too warm, like it had just been. Waiting for my fingers, I looked around and tried to act normal. But the whole place had a strange stillness to it, like a photograph pretending to be a room. The truckers at the counter barely moved. One man in a denim jacket kept staring at his pie without blinking. Another sat with both hands around a fork he never lifted. Their faces looked washed out, like all the color in them had been rained away. I asked the waitress how long the place had been there. She smiled without showing teeth and said, "Longer than most folks make it up this road." I asked if there was a mechanic nearby, just to hear a normal answer, and one of the men in the booth to my left said, without looking at me, "Won't need one where you're headed." That tightened something cold behind my ribs. I stood up too quickly and told the waitress I'd better get back on the road. She didn't argue. She only nodded toward the far wall near the restrooms and said, "Before you go, you should check the board. People around here like knowing who passed through." I followed her gesture without thinking, and there on the wall beside a dusty rack of tourist brochures was a big corkboard covered in missing person flyers. Dozens layered over each other, old paper curling at the edges. Faded photos, names and dates from different years. Truckers, backpackers, couples, a state trooper, a teenage girl, faces frozen in cheap printouts, missing, never returned, last seen on Black Ridge Road. Then my stomach dropped so suddenly I had to catch the edge of the counter, in the center of the board, pinned crooked and still. Fresh enough that the paper hadn't yellowed yet, was a new flyer with my driver's license photo on it. Underneath was my name, and under that, in thick black letters, "Last seen tonight." For a second I genuinely thought I was dreaming, not because the room went blurry or the floor tilted under me, but because my mind rejected what my eyes were showing it with the same stubborn force you use when reading a typo 3 times and still not being able to accept the word is wrong, and I remember staring at my own face on that board, while the rain battered the windows and the neon open sign buzzed overhead, and thinking there had to be an explanation, some prank, some sick setup, some truck stop joke designed to scare rookies stupid enough to come through Black Ridge after midnight. But then I looked at the date under my photo, and what little breath I had left went cold in my chest. Because it wasn't yesterday's date or last week's date. It was that very night, typed neatly under my name as if whoever made the flyer had already filed me away with the rest. I turned around too fast, half expecting laughter, cameras, somebody slapping a table and telling me I'd been had, but nobody was smiling. The waitress was wiping the same dry patch of counter with the same tired circular motion. The men at the stools were watching me in the mirror behind the coffee machine instead of directly. One old trucker in a brown cap lifted his eyes just enough to meet mine, and there was no cruelty in his face, no humor either, only pity so deep. It made my legs feel weak. I asked too loudly, "Who put that up there?" The waitress said, "We did." I asked why. She answered, "Because it was your turn." That was when panic finally took the wheel. I shoved past a table, nearly slipped on the wet tile, and ran for the door. The bell above it jingled once when I hit it, but the door wouldn't open. I hit it again. Harder, shoulder first this time. And the glass shook in its frame but stayed shut like someone had dead-bolted the night itself. I could hear my own pulse in my ears now. I spun around and shouted that if this was some kind of joke I was calling the police, and one of the men at the counter let out the strangest sound I have ever heard in a human room. Not quite a laugh, not quite a cough, more like a dead engine trying to turn over. "No signal up here," he said without looking at me. "Hasn't been for a long time." I fumbled out my phone anyway. No bars, dead screen, not low battery dead, though it had been at 60% when I came in. I backed toward the windows, trying to see my truck through the rain and steam, but the glass had become a black mirror, reflecting only the inside of the diner. That was when I noticed something even worse. None of the people in the room were reflecting correctly. They were there, but wrong, like the glass was remembering older versions of them. The waitress in the reflection wore a different uniform, yellowed and old-fashioned. The trucker in the brown cap looked younger, with blood down one side of his neck. Another man at the end of the counter appeared, burned across half his face in the glass, though he looked whole when I turned toward him. I blinked hard, stepped closer, and the reflections changed again, not into monsters, not into anything loud or theatrical, just into people at the exact moment life had stopped being interested in keeping them. "What is this place?" I whispered, and the waitress stopped wiping the counter at last. She set the rag down, folded it carefully, and looked at me with a kind of sadness that somehow frightened me more than if she had screamed. "It's where the road keeps what it takes," she said. I remember shaking my head and saying no over and over. Because denial is easier than understanding until understanding becomes impossible to ignore. Then the old trucker in the brown cap stood up. His chair legs scraped the floor, and everyone else in the diner went still. "You took the cut through at marker 22, he said, "didn't you?" I told him yes. He nodded once, almost to himself. "Washout's been there since '98. I stared at him. He pointed toward the black windows. Ain't no road from marker 22 to here. Not anymore. I wanted to call him a liar, but a memory came back then, small and sharp as glass. 10 miles before the diner, I had passed a rusted barricade half hidden in brush on the side of the road. I had barely noticed it through the rain. My GPS had rerouted me around it without comment. At the time I told myself it must have been left over from old construction. Now that glimpse of bent metal felt like a trapdoor opening under every sensible thought I had left. I asked where my truck was. Nobody answered. I ran to the side window and wiped away the condensation with my sleeve. The pumps were there. The rain was there. The canopy was there, but my truck was gone. In its place, just beyond the glow of the lot lights, I could make out the dim outlines of several semis parked in the darkness facing the diner. Too many of them, rows deeper than the lot should have held, all with black cabs and windshields shining wet under the storm. No, I said again, quieter this time, because something in me had started to understand before I was ready. The waitress walked out from behind the counter and came to stand a few feet away. Most people don't arrive all at once, she said. Usually the road takes them in pieces. A skid, a missed turn, sleep at the wheel. You came fast. I asked her what she meant. She looked toward the window, toward the dark lot where my truck should have been, and said, almost gently, "Honey, you didn't stop here on your way through. You stopped here after." The moment the waitress said, "Honey, you didn't stop here on your way through. You stopped here after," I felt something inside me go cold, because deep down I already knew there was a reason every mile of Black Ridge Road had felt wrong. And once those words hit me, all the details I had been trying not to think about came rushing back at once. The GPS turning gray at marker 22. The bent barricade half hidden in the rain, the way the trailer had pulled sideways on that last curve. The split second of weightlessness I had convinced myself was just bad pavement. And then that sound. God, that sound. Metal twisting, glass bursting, the kind of noise your body remembers even when your mind refuses to. I'm Mr. D, and you are listening to Mr. D Stories. Most of you listening to my stories are not subscribed yet, so please like and subscribe to hear more from Bloody Chapter. I asked where my truck was, but Lena only looked toward the back of the diner, toward a narrow hallway disappearing into shadow. I walked that way on legs that barely felt like mine, every sound around me suddenly too clear. The hum of the lights, the tick of a wall clock, the scrape of boots as the old trucker in the brown cap followed a few steps behind without ever trying to stop me. When I pushed open the back door, the wind hit first, cold enough to steal my breath, and then came the smell. Wet earth, gasoline, pine, cold metal. The ground behind the diner dropped into a ravine, and down there, tangled in broken branches and washed out mud, lay my truck. Even twisted the way it was, I knew it instantly. The company logo was still visible on the crumpled door. The sleeper had folded in on itself. One headlight still burned weakly through the storm, like it hadn't gotten the message yet. I dropped to my knees in the mud and just stared, because in that moment I understood why nobody inside had looked surprised to see me, why the waitress knew my name, why my face was already on that wall. The old trucker came to stand beside me and told me his name was Roy. He said they had all come here the same way, him on black ice in 2003, Lena in summer fog back in 1987, the burned man at the counter after a tanker fire in 1974. Every one of them had found the diner. Only after the road had already taken them. I asked why they were still there, and Roy looked down at the wreck below and said, "Because some people leave when they remember enough to let go, and some stay because something in them still won't." Then I asked what kept them, and he answered with one word that hurt more than the truth of the crash: regret. That word opened something in me, because regret is never one thing. It's every call you said you'd make tomorrow, every apology you thought could wait, Every person you loved carelessly because you assumed life would keep giving you chances. And maybe that was why my phone started ringing right then, sharp and sudden inside my jacket, like the world beyond that diner had reached in one last time. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. But when I looked down, the screen was glowing again, and all I saw were missed calls from my sister Mara. Then it rang again, and I answered. She was crying before I even spoke. She said state police had found my truck off Black Ridge. They were trying to reach family, and she kept saying, "Danny, please, if this is you, say something," and hearing her voice cut through everything. It cut through the fear, the storm, the diner, the dead faces, all of it. It reminded me that somewhere beyond that road, beyond that wall full of lost people, there was still somebody waiting for me to come back. I told Roy I wasn't staying. I told Lena I wasn't becoming one more story pinned to that board. Lena looked at me with the saddest smile I'd ever seen and said, "Then don't sit down again." That was when I understood something else about the diner. It wasn't a trap in the way I first thought. It was an invitation, a warm room, a cup of coffee, a place to stop fighting, a place where the dead could slowly get used to the fact that they weren't egoing anywhere. And if I stayed there 1 second too long, if I let that warmth settle into me, if I let Mara's voice fade under the rain, then I would never leave either. I ran before I could change my mind. I ran straight down that muddy slope toward the wreck, slipping, grabbing branches, tearing my hands open on wet bark and rock, while the voices behind me rose with a storm. Not angry, not chasing, just calling my name the way people do when they already know how hard it is to leave warmth once. Death has put its hands on you. The cab was half crushed, the windshield gone, the driver's door bent open like a broken jaw. I pulled myself through shattered glass and twisted metal, and then I saw it. Saw myself slumped over the wheel, blood dried black across my shirt, face gray in the flicker of the dying dashboard. There is no fear like seeing your own body. It is too intimate, too final. It feels like the world is showing you the truth before your soul is ready to hear it. But Mara was still on the phone, still crying, still saying my name, and I held on to that sound like it was a rope dropped into deep water. I reached out, touched my own shoulder, and the whole world seemed to rip open at once. Then suddenly, I was choking, coughing, dragging air into lungs that felt full of knives, while white flashlight beams cut through the rain and somebody shouted, "He's alive! He's alive!" The next clear thing I remember is waking up in a hospital 3 days later with my sister asleep beside the bed and pain in every inch of me that still worked. The trooper who came by later told me I should have died in that ravine. Said another 20 minutes in the cold and they would have found a body instead of a survivor. I asked him if there had ever been a diner on Black Ridge, and he frowned and told me the last stop had burned down in 1987 after a tanker explosion. Nothing left now but part of the foundation and cracked pavement near the ravine. I never told him what I saw. Some truths sound foolish in daylight. But a month later, when I was finally strong enough to go through the bag of things recovered from my truck, I found something that had no business being there. A paper coffee coaster, dry and clean, with blue handwriting across the front, for words, "You made it through, Lena." I still keep it in my desk, and I still think about that place more than I want to admit, not because I want to go back, but because I understand now why some people never leave. The diner was warm, quiet, forgiving. It asked nothing of you except that you stop trying, that you let go, that you sit down and accept that whatever was broken could stay broken forever. That is what made it so dangerous. Not the ghosts, not the road, not even the crash. It was the relief. The terrible relief of being offered rest before you were ready to fight for one more breath. Ever since that night, I call people back the first time they reach out. I don't leave apologies for later. I don't trust roads that feel too empty or lights that appear where no map says they should be. And when rain hits my windshield, hard enough at night, I still remember that yellow glow in the storm and the board on the wall full of faces waiting to become memory. Maybe that is what the last stop really was. Not a place for the dead, but a place for the almost dead. A final quiet room where regret sits across from you and asks whether you retired enough to stay. I almost was. And every now and then, when life gets loud enough to make me careless again, I take that coaster out of the drawer, read those 4 words, and remind myself that some people don't get a second chance after the road decides it is finished with them. I did, and I have no intention of wasting it. Thanks for watching.